Bruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Beis. Start with Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. 5 lines from the bottom. We learned until now that when Roiv of the Tzibur is Tameh, nonetheless the Korban Pesach is brought in a state of Tumah. If of course the majority of Yidden are going to be Taharin, then those who are Tameh are Nidche to bring the Korban Pesach and Pesach Sheni 1 month later on Yudalid B'Iyar. What happens, asks the Gemara now, when you have a situation of Mechza al Mechza? Says the Gemara, Itmar, Harei Shahoyi Yisrael Mechza Taharin Umechza Tamehin. When half of the Jews are Tamein, while half are Taharin, Rav Omar Mechza al Mechza Keroiv. V'Rav Kahana Omar Mechza al Mechza Eino Keroiv. There's a machlokes, ever look at it as Keroiv or not like Roiv. Rav says we look at Keroiv, whereas Rav Kahana argues. Gemara now explains. Rav Omar Mechza al Mechza Keroiv. Halolu oisin la'atzmon v'halolu oisin la'atzmon. Rav says since we look at it as Mechza al Mechza Keroiv, then therefore comes out that those who are Tahor, we look at them as the Roiv, whereby they bring the Korban Pesach on Yudalid ben Nisan. And also, those who are those who are now Tameh, they cannot be brought together with the Taharin, but they themselves are looked at as a Roiv, and therefore they also bring the Korban Pesach in a state of Tumah on Yudalid ben Nisan as well. Rav Kahana Omar Mechta Mechta Eino Keroiv Taharin Oisin es Harishon Utmein Oisin es Hasheni. Rav Kahana, who argues and says it's not that they are considered to be the Roiv, whereby the Taharin, they will bring the Korban Pesach Barishon because they're the state of Tahara. However, the Tamein, since they are not Roiv, therefore they're just a Miut, they will bring the Korban Pesach and Pesach Sheni. The Gemara brings another version of Kahana. Omar Rav Kahana Mechza al Mechza Einoi Keroiv Taharin Oisin es Harishon. That's the same. The Taharin will still bring the Korban Barishon because even though they're a mute, but they're Taharin, so certainly they bring the Korban. V'tmein on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Beis Ein Oisin Loi es Harishon v'Loi es Hasheni. Neither do they bring the first or the second Korban Pesach. Barishon le'avdei de le'have rubai. The reason why they don't bring in Korban Rishon, Pesach Rishon, is because they're not a Roiv, and only when the Roiv is Tameh can they then go ahead and bring it in a state of Tumah. Basheni le'ova avdei de le'have miuto. They don't bring a Korban Sheni because they're also not a miut. So it comes out that Rav Kahana's first version says that they're not a majority, and therefore, right, they're a minority. However, in the second version, he says they're not a majority, but they're also not a minority. And therefore, since the Tamein are not a majority, they can't bring in the Rishon. And since they're not a minority, they can't bring in the second Korban either. Tanan, the Gemara now brings our Mishnah. Nitma kahal aruboi. If the majority of the Kihila, or the entire Kihila certainly, is Tameh, Oy shahayu hakoyhanim Tameim, v'hakal Taharin, or the Koyhanim are Tameim, even if the Kahal is Tahar, Yaseh ketuma. The Mishnah states, then we can bring the Korban Tameh, the Korban Pesach, in a state of Tumah. Now the Gemara makes a deal. Ruba Yehuda Avdei Betuma Aval Palgo Pagalei Avdei Barishon. It's only if the majority is in a state of Tuma is the Korban Pesach Rishon brought. But if it's only Mechza al Mechza, it's not. Kashya L'Rav, who says that indeed the Korban Pesach Rishon is brought, both by the Taharin as well as by the Tamein. Omar Lach Rav. Rav will say to you, Ruba avdei kula betuma. That which it says in the Mishnah is talking about when Ruba, they bring it together in the state of Tuma. Palgo palga halalu oisin la'atzim halalu oisin la'atzim. Whereas the case that we're talking about, where it's mechza mechza, so then half of them will bring it in a state of tahara, when they are tahirim, and the others who are tameim will bring it when they are tameim, but they'll both bring separately the Karban Pesach Rishon. The Gemara now says, we'll support Rav's explanation with the Seifa of this Mishnah. Hachanami mistabro. Dektani Seifa, it teaches, Nitma miut hakal. If only the miut of the kahal is tamei, the Mishnah goes on to say, Taharin oisin es harishon, and Tamein oisin es hasheni. Then the Taharin make the Rishon, because they're the majority, and those who are a minority of Tamein will then have to be pushed off till Pesach Sheni. Miut hu de'avdei b'sheni. The miut, they are the ones who do the Pesach Sheni. Aval, palga or palga, loy. But the second situation of palga, our situation, they would not bring. Va'avdi b'rishon. And they will do it in a when they're by the first one. Instead, they'll do it as the Rishon, because after all, they're Palga, and Rav will explain it to mean because since we'll consider them to be the Roiv, they'll also bring in Pesach Rishon. Each one, the Taharim will bring their Pesach Rishon, and the group of Tameim will bring their Pesach Rishon. Ve'ela, the Gemara asks, Kashya Rav Kahana. Once you bring the Seifa as a support for Rav, now we'll then have it as a Kashya for the Shita of Rav Kahana. Because Rav Kahana states that in the regards to those who are Tamein, they do not bring the Karban Pesach Rishon. So what does he do with our Seifa? Says the Gemara, Malach Rav Kahana. He'll explain to you, Nitmu mi'ut hakahal. That which it states in the Mishnah, if only the miut, a minority of the kahal becomes tamei, taharin oisin as harishon, utmein oisin as hasheni. The din is, says the Mishnah, that those who are tahor, because they're the majority, they will bring the Karban Pesach Rishon. Those who are miut, which is tmeim, will bring the Pesach Sheni. Diuk, hapalga upalga, but if it's only mechza, taharin oisin as harishon, according to Rav Kahana, the Taharim will bring the Rishon, and those who are Tmein, who are only a miut, do not bring not the Rishon and not the Sheni. The Gemara says that's very good only according to the second version of Rav Kahana. Hatenech l'lishna basr Rav Kahana. Elo l'hach lishna da'amar Rav Kahana, Taharin oisins ha-Rishon, utmein oisins ha-Sheni, ma'ikele meimar. But according to Rav Kahana's first version, where he says that the Tmeim do bring in the Pesach Sheni, what are you going to say? O Malach Rav Kahana, Hu adin dafilu palga nami. That's true also, they'll bring, in the case of Mechza, they'll bring the Pesach Sheni as well, those who are Tmeim. Taharin oisin is harishon, utmein oisin is hasheni. V'hodik tani miyut hakahal. You'll say, but it says, only when it's miyut hakahal do they bring a Pesach Sheni. And here we're talking mechza. Says Rav Kahana, I did the Tana Reisha Ruboy, Tananami Seva Miuto. Where the Tana is just being consistent from the Reisha. The Reisha talking about when the Roiv is Tamei. So talked about in the Seifa when the Miut is Tamei. But who adin if it's mechza? Now the Gemara brings three brises, one according to each opinion. The first one according to Rav, the second one according to Rav Kahana's first version, and the third one according to Rav Kahana's second version. Says the Gemara, Tanya Kavose de Rav. We have a bryce like Rav. Tanya Kavose de Rav Kahana kitrei lishni. And we have a bryce of verbose lishonos of Rav Kahana as follows. Tanya Kavose de Rav. We have a bryce that supports Rav. Now again, Rav said that we look at it as roiv when it's mechza, whereby both groups of taharin, separately and independently from those who are Tameim, will bring each one the Karban Pesach Rishon. So here's the Brisa. Hayu Yisrael mechza tahirin u mechza Tameim. Halalu oisin la'atzman v'halalu oisin la'atzman. That's the first Brisa, and that supports exactly what Rav had said. Tanya Kilishna Kamad Rav Kahana. We have another Brisa that supports the first Lashon of Rav Kahana. As follows. Harei Shahoy Yisrael mechza taharin u mechza tamein. that when you have a situation when it's mechzo, taharin oisin es harishon or tmein oisin es hasheni, then the taharin, since they're the majority, they will then go ahead and bring the carbon Pesach Rishon. In other words, they're not the majority, but rather they are mechzo. He looks at it as not a majority, but as a minority, they will bring the Pesach Rishon. The Tmein, however, they are a minority, and therefore they will bring the Pesach Sheni, just like the Brisa says. We have a third Brisa, like the second Lashon of Rav Kahana, that stated that when it comes to the first, the Harin, we will then allow them to bring the Korban Pesach Rishon because they're a miyut. Whereas comes to the Pesach Sheni, the Tmeim will not bring, not the Rishon, not the Sheni. As follows, Tainikav Kalishna Basir Rav Kahana, Hareisha Hoyi Yisrael Mechza Taharin Umechza Tmein. Says the Brisa, Taharin Oisin es Harishon. Those who are Taharin, even though they're miyut, according to the way we're explaining it, they will bring the Korban Pesach Rishon. Tmein ein non oisin lo yas harishon v'lo yas hasheni. They don't bring either one, just as Rav Kahana's second statement said. Now the Gemara goes through these brisos and explains how the Amoraim, Rav Kahana, can explain according to each brisa as well. L'Rav u'lelishna basra Rav Kahana. According to Rav and the second Lashon of Rav Kahana, we're going to then explain the second brisa. The second brisa says as follows: Hodetano taharin oisin es harishon v'tmein es hasheni heich mitartilo. That second brisa that stated it was a support for Rav Kahana's first statement. How is Rav and Rav Kahana's second statement going to answer it? Which talked about whereas the harin are oisin es harishon and tmein are oisin es hasheni. Beginning with Rav. Says the Gemara, Kigon Shahayi Yisrael, Mechza Taharin, Umechza Tmein. Half of the Yisrael are Taharin, and half are Tmein. V'noshti mashlimos l'Tmein. In order to then make it so it's Mechza, you need women to be mashed, to make it so that's exactly half and half. So now you have half Taharin and half Tmein together with the women to be mashlim. Because the women were more Tmein, and without them, then it would have been roiv taharin. So now with the nashim to be mashlimois, now you have chetzi and chetzi. V'ksovar nashim barishon reshus. And this Tana holds that nashim have a reshus to bring the Korban Pesach Rishon. Kol shekain, they don't have an obligation for the second Korban Pesach Sheni. So then dal nashim mitmein v'havu luhu tmein. Once you then take away the women who are not obligated in the Pesach Rishon, so now you're left with a miut of the Tmein, and the miut is not and the miut is doiche Pesach Sheni to bring Pesach Sheni, whereby that's what this Lashon in the Tana is saying. This second brisa is stating that the miut will bring the Pesach Sheni, just as Rav Kahana had said, and this will also then support the opinion of Rav and Rav Kahana's second version to explain this brisa. Now the Gemara goes on to explain the third brisa. L'Rav u'lelishna kamad Rav Kahana. Both Rav and the first lashon of Rav Kahana, how are they going to explain the third brisa that states, just like Rav Kahana's second version, that it's talking about where the Tmeim don't bring a Korban Pesach Rishon, don't bring a Korban Pesach Sheni, as follows: Hodetanya, that which it says in the third brisa, quoting the brisa, Taharin oisin es harishon, utmein ein oisin lo yas harishon v'lo yas hasheni. Heichi mitartzilo. How are these Amoraim going to explain this brisa? Beginning with Rav. Rav mitaretz loy kigon shahoyi yisrael mechzet tmein umechzet taharin v'noshim oidofois ala taharim. Here you have half of Yisrael, of the Gevarim, that are going to be Tameh, and half that are Tahor. And the women are Oidofois ala Taharim. They make it so that there's more Taharin than Tamein when they combine with these Zecharim. Uksovar, and this Tana holds, Noshim, Barishoin choiva, basheni rishus. The first one, this Tana holds, the Nashim are yes obligated in the Korban Pesach Rishon, but they're not. It's only a rishus for Korban Pesach Sheni. Barishoin, and therefore, in regards to the first Korban, loy avde, the havle mute, umiyut loy mute lo havde the karishon. Since it's only a mute that are tmeim, therefore they don't bring the Korban Pesach Rishon. Ubesheni loy avde. And the second, they also do not bring, because dal nashim meinaihu v'avalu palgo palgo. Because if you take away the women from this calculation, then you'll be left with mechza mechza. Upalgo le'avde b'sheni. When it's half, they don't do the Korban Pesach sheni. Ulerav. That explains how Rav would explain that brisa. But now about Rav Kahana's first version, how does he explain? Rav Kahana de Omar Palganami Avdi B'Sheni, who does say in his first version that the Tmeim do bring the Korban Pesach Sheni. How will he explain this brisa that says that they do not bring, not the Korban Pesach Rishon, not the Korban Pesach Sheni? Hachi Metaretz Lei Kigon Shahoyu Yisrael Mechza Taharin or Mechza Tmein, where you have a situation when it's half and half, and Nashim Ashlim Taharin, that together with the Nashim. So it makes it so that it's going to be half and half. That means without the Nashim's women who are more tahor, it would have been more of a tmein. But now together with the women in the calculation, then it comes up the mechza on mechza, chetzi taharin and chetzi tmein, because the women had even more taharin than the calculation before. So it comes out the mechza on mechza with the women who are taharin. V'ksavar, and this Tana holds Noshim berishoin choiva ubesheni rishus, that in regards to women, the first Korban Pesach is a choiva, the second is only a rishus. Barishon le'avdei, they don't do the first Korban Pesach, they have a palgo palgo, because it's only mechzo mechzo. Upalga barishon le'avdei, and therefore they don't do the Pesach Rishon because they're only half. Half don't bring the Korban Pesach Rishon. B'sheni nami li'avdi, the second they also don't bring because only Rishus. Dal noshim minayhu minatahorim havulu tmein. And if you take away then the women from the calculation, so it comes out to be then only a miut of tmeim. Dal noshim minayhu minatahorim havulu tmein. If you take away the women from the calculation, then you have a majority, rather, of Tmeim. Because we said the women's Taharim is greater than the majority of the Zacharim that are Tmeim, which made it Mechzel Mechzel. So when you take away the women who are Taharim, you have then a majority of Tmeim. Veruba avdi b'sheni. And when it has a majority of Tmeim, we don't have the row of Tmeim bring a Korban Pesach Sheni. It's only when it's a Miut that's Nidcha that they bring a Korban Pesach Sheni, but not when it's a Roiv. Now the Gemara comes to the first of the three brisos. In other words, the second brisa and the third brisa that was just explained could be explained by both Rav and Rav Kahana as well. But now the Gemara brings the first brisa and says, Rav Kahana haditanya, that which stays in the first brisa. This is going to be difficult to Rav Kahana, right? Because this first brisa again was exactly like Rav said, that we allow both groups to be mechza, each one, the taharin as well as the tmeim, to bring the Korban Pesach Rishon. Says the Gemara, what does Rav Kahana do with this brisa? Harei shahayu yisrael mechza tahar mechza tmein halalu oisin la'atzm v'halalu oisin la'atzmon heichim b'taretz. What would Rav Kahana explain? How will explain this brisa, which is exactly like Rav? Omar loch Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana would have to say to you, Tanoihi. It's a machlokes tani enochanami. This brisa is exactly like Rav. But the previous brises that we quoted, what we called the second and third brises, those can be explained like me. That's how Rav is learning. However, there's another brisa, either the previous one or ones before, that learned like me, that is not like Roiv, and therefore it's a machlokes tanoim.